Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hello, this is Marco Ciappelli on Redefining Society Podcast. And I got to say, I'm struggling in Redefining Society right now. It's changing too fast. Every time I start redefining and I'm like, okay, I'm getting somewhere. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoops, let's get the eraser and and make a change on that line. So luckily, I get to talk on Redefining Society with a lot of people that inspire me, a lot of people that, even in this case, they also have a podcast on ITSPmagazine, the Cyber Cognition, and that's what they think about. They think about what's going on in our society, and in particular, generative AI. It seems like it's really changing a lot of fields, and some people are scared of it. Some people are excited about it. Maybe the truth is in the middle. I don't know. I usually go there. But I wanted to catch up with Justin Hutchens, which is here in the show. If you're watching the video, it's right there. If you're listening, I'm not lying. He's right here. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marco. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I'm glad that you jumped on as soon as I asked you, because we don't really need to prepare for this. There is no Q&A. Well, there's never a Q&A on my show anyway, but in this case, I just want to pick your brain and see what you think. We made a joke before start recording that if we have having this conversation 2 months ago, even 2 weeks ago, it would have been completely different. The river is moving fast.
It's crazy how fast things are moving in AI.
Okay, so let's start with a little bit about yourself, just a quick bio in case people haven't heard your show, and who you are and why am I actually excited to talk to you about AI.
Yeah, awesome. So name's Justin Hutchens. I usually go by Hutch. I have had a long time interest in artificial intelligence, and specifically the intersection between artificial intelligence and risk, to include cybersecurity. I am the author of the soon-to-be-released book, The Language of Deception, Weaponizing Next Generation AI, which looks at multiple different facets of different ways that adversarial threat actors could misuse emerging artificial intelligence. And then also the host of the ITSPmagazine podcast, Cognition, which also kind of looks at artificial intelligence, mostly from a risk perspective, but in general, kind of looking at kind of the ways in which AI is increasingly becoming entangled in these ideas of philosophy and the ways that we even understand culture in the world around us.
And everything has come together. I think we talked about this already when we were announcing your show, and we had a conversation. We met because you were having a talk at one of the big conference about this. And, we talk about cybersecurity, and you talk about philosophy, ethics. Things happen in the world of education, world of jobs, anything. I mean, healthcare, and there is the people that are going against it and don't want it, and people that really go blinded into it. So it touches on pretty much, I don't want to say everything, but a good portion of our life. So how do you track all of that?
So it is tough. I can't. So even working in the field and having I work for a company called Trace3, and I lead research and development. So of course, like any R&D professional right now, a big part of my focus is AI. And even with that being kind of my 9-to-5 job, it's tough keeping up with everything that's going on. So I can't imagine for kind of somebody that has a casual interest trying to keep up with just in a given week, how many things are changing in this industry. Personally, I am consistently looking at kind of new white papers. There is another podcast called Last Week in AI that I think actually my last guest on Cognition, Jeremy Harris, is one of the co-hosts of that podcast. And they do really well to actually hit kind of just a little bit of depth, but just a ton of breadth as far as everything that happens week to week. And he was telling me on the podcast how they spend over 5 hours for every single episode just preparing because of how much is coming in. So it's a challenge. I mean, you really have to make a deliberate effort to even try to keep up with everything going on.
Oh my God. Just the name. Last week. I mean,
last week in a
years ago, we would have said like last month, maybe just already a stretch, right?
What's funny is this is a long time running podcast that far precedes ChatGPT.
Oh, wow.
And he was telling me kind of how it's transformed from like a small amount of time for preparation to now just in recent months, just the insane amount of time they have to put into it. So yeah, it's definitely apparent how fast the acceleration of change is picking up.
So a lot of people think that too fast is the problem, and I'm probably one of that. If I start putting my head of sociology, and maybe from a philosophical perspective, no, but from a societal perspective, yes. I mean, regulation, we know they're always behind in technology, so I have a feeling that's the real hurdle right there. We can't regulate; it's too fast.
Yeah, I think that is one of the significant challenges is that regulation is always going to lag behind innovation. I think for any industry that is true to some degree. I think probably more so in artificial intelligence. But for a lot of industries where that is the case, you see regulation, and instead of trying to regulate the specific details, generally you will set up some kind of agency that is put in charge of managing oversight of a particular area. And I think and hopefully we do get to a point where there is some kind of regulation around this, but if we get to a point where something is successful, I think it's going to have to be some kind of model like that. There's no way that they can legislate down to the specific details, because by the time anything gets passed, all of the technical details are going to be irrelevant because of how fast this is moving. But I do think that this is the topic of regulation is an increasingly important one, because I think we are, to your point, we're almost moving too fast to the point where, yes, we're enabling business in ways that we've never seen before. But I think there's really risk in two different areas. One is that implementation risk of, if you're an organization and you are just trying to keep up with everybody else that's mainlining these new technologies into their operational workflows, you're likely to do the same without the appropriate safeguards. And that could introduce tremendous risk to your organization. But there's also the adversarial risk, which is kind of the topic of the book that I worked on and am going to be putting out in the near future, is the fact that as we introduce these new capabilities, threat actors are as fast, if not faster, picking up these same capabilities and using them for nefarious purposes. And what's crazy is we're already at a point where we look at something like GPT-4, which is already so extremely powerful. And a lot of people there's even been white papers that have kind of adapted some of the leading IQ tests to evaluate its levels of logical reasoning. And we're seeing it already perform in the top 99 percentile of humans. And now Google is already talking about their Gemini model, which is likely going to come out at some point this year, that is supposedly 5 times the computational power of what we saw with GPT-4. And we're talking about in a matter of
5 times. Sorry, did I get that? 5 times?
5 times the computational power of GPT-4. So, yeah, it's hard to even fathom at that point, because with these large language models, we have this idea of emergent properties, where as they continue to scale, as we continue to make them larger and larger, make bigger neural networks that are supporting them and more layers, and ultimately more parameters, which is kind of how we measure the computational power of LLMs these days, they start becoming able to do things that they previously weren't able to. With some of the small initial large language models, we saw just a basic ability to maybe answer questions and do some autocomplete. But as we've continued to scale these up, we've seen them just naturally develop these new capabilities, from logical reasoning, from being able to do code completion, from being able to translate from one language to another, things that they were never deliberately trained for. And so there's this immediate question of, we already have these profound capabilities with something like GPT-4. We do that 5x. What new capabilities are going to be unlocked that we can't even foresee that are suddenly going to be available to everyone in the general public? And so I think there is a tremendous amount of risk that we need to start considering as essentially these tech firms just compete against each other to make bigger and bigger models.
Yeah, so I think I have 2 points. I'm going to start with the reason why we do it like this. So regulation, not going to catch up anytime soon. We could self-regulate. Not going to happen. So, but why it's not going to happen is because from a business perspective, when you have a market, and I'm going to give you an example that it's something I experienced myself, where you may want to hold on from an ethical perspective, test it, be sure, definitely cybersecurity, but even ethically speaking. But then there is a first player, it comes in. So, the script, for example, to edit podcast as a language instead of a timeline, right? So looking at the wave, sound wave, you actually remove a word and that's gone. You don't need to cut it. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is amazing. And then within a month, Adobe now has that neural engine in Photoshop, in Premiere, and all the tools that you use. And then you go, there's Canvas that you can do the same thing. Midjourney, DALL-E 3, and then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, just put your input in Photoshop. It's going to generate whatever you want. So the point is, if you don't jump on the train is gone. And
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. It's almost disadvantageous for American businesses for us to implement regulation. And then I think it also begs the question of if it would even be effective, because with multinational companies, you always have the issue of what is commonly referred to as regulatory arbitrage. Basically, if there are very stiff regulations in the country where I'm wanting to do business, but I want to continue to do business, I just move my operations elsewhere where I can get away with it.
Yep.
And so we see that commonly in financial, where people move to the Caymans in order to do their shady financial business. And essentially we could likely expect that we would see the same thing with artificial intelligence. If we implement strict regulations, people will move where they can continue to do operations.
Yeah. So do you think there is, because that's a big question for me, and I agree with you. I don't know, any industry, like, okay, if I can't do it here, I'm going to do it somewhere else. But then the government is going to say, well, no, you can stay here because we want your money. You want you to pay taxes and hire people. So it's become an economic decision. But as a humans, can we think about it a little bit, or we're just doomed to just follow?
It's a tough question. So I don't think that obviously there are significant challenges with effectively regulating, and I think those have to be taken into consideration with any potential regulation that we try to put forward. But I think what it really gets to is the importance of global partnerships, and even that has significant challenges related to it. Getting everybody on the same page, especially when you have general adversarial views of one another as it pertains to other things. But so I mean, it's a really challenging problem to solve, and unfortunately I think there's no shortage of problems and potential risk here, but the solutions, while there are some out there, they tend to be kind of almost leaning towards idealistic and in some ways almost unrealistic because of the challenges that you have to overcome in order to even implement that. Now, I'm by no means suggesting that we shouldn't try, but I do think that there are significant challenges ahead in regard to trying to put the guardrails on this. And what I talk to people about frequently is I think that it's fascinating because if you look at any of the historical, you go back 10, 20 years, you look at any of the science fiction, if you look at any of the writing from any of the main futurists, there was always this perspective that advanced artificial intelligence was going to kind of break out of its guardrails, break out of its sandbox, and take over the world. And what's fascinating is that in truth, there never was any guardrails. There never was a sandbox. The moment we had anything that was even remotely comparable to human intelligence, we immediately were like, put it out on the internet, start connecting it with everything, give it agency and autonomy to actually take actions without human intervention. So it's fascinating to see that kind of this idea that it would overtake those controls never really was even an obstacle for AI in the first place.
Well, once you connect it, I remember I was reading couple of years ago, 3 years ago, Max Tegmark book, Life 3.0. And there is like all these scenarios, similar to like Nick Bostrom. And funny story is like the problem always happens when you take the hardware and you connect it to access to the internet. Some scenarios like let's put it in between four walls. There is no cable, one thing and another. But then some scenario it manipulates people into help to escape, and you're like, well, we're not that stupid. Well, the truth is we don't need it. We already put it on the internet, so I don't even need to worry about that. So my other point that I wanted to ask you is, so five times the power. And we don't know exactly what to expect. It's going to learn things on its own. So is this the real concrete step toward general artificial intelligence?
So it's an excellent question. I think it really depends on how you define artificial general intelligence. If you define artificial general intelligence as something that is able to generalize to such an extent that it's able to use the information available to do new and unique things, kind of tackle those zero-shot problems, then in a lot of ways, we're already seeing at least the early signs of general intelligence with GPT-4. I mean, you can take something like that, give it the specifications for an API that was not in its training data, something that's been published since it was even trained, and tell it kind of what you want it to accomplish with that API, and then basically just create a very simple relay or interface to take its commands, execute them within the API, and then return the output. And we're already seeing systems that are capable of taking action in that general form that is completely outside of its original training set. But of course, most of those actions right now are still very much in the digital world. That is to say, they can interact with APIs, they can interact with systems, but they can't necessarily interact with the physical world. And I think a lot of people, when they think of AGI, they think of kind of what we saw in the old science fiction movies with robots that are roaming around, and without any training, they can figure out kind of simple things like go make me some coffee or go brush up the stuff on the floor or something like that. Obviously, we already have robots that can do that, but they're in most cases, they're deliberately trained for those particular tasks. They're not generalizing. They can't kind of adapt to the world as needed. What's interesting is that the transformer architecture, which was the basic architecture that is used for most of the generative AI systems that we're seeing these days, everything from DALL-E to ChatGPT to some of the different audio models and stuff like that. There's actually been a white paper that was recently done by Google, and I say recently, at this point, it's not that recent because it was, I think, over a year ago, but it looked at how the transformer architecture could actually be used in the same way. So kind of with each of our different medias that we've used transformers for, you basically take the input data and you tokenize it into small pieces of data. So for language models, you basically break down the language into individual words. Those words each have some kind of numerical token. And that's actually what the system is computing on, is those tokens. Same thing with image generation. You basically break down a particular image into squares of pixels. In most cases, you've got something like 16 by 16 patches of pixels, and each of those are individual tokens that are handled. And what this paper did was it looked at how we could actually tokenize kinetic actions for robotics in the same way using that transformer architecture. And the way that they did that was they basically had a bunch of employees that remotely controlled different robotic systems that had a video camera looking at those interactions. And they would append to those different video interactions the language text describing the actions, and then would also tokenize the specific changes to kind of the rotation, the adjustment of the different mechanical components of the robot. And what they found was that by doing this, the systems were able to generalize in a way that was very similar to what we see in terms of generalization with language or generalization with images, to where robotic systems could be put in completely different contexts to where they've never seen that. They could have all kinds of distractions around them, be asked to do things that they have never been asked in their training, and could actually generalize very effectively, far beyond any benchmarks that we've seen before, to complete these tasks. So what's interesting is, while these initial innovations existed in language models, it seems that the exact same technology is likely going to be the foundation for physical robotics in the near future, and kind of that next step of general intelligence beyond just digital tool usage, of potentially having robots in the physical world moving around us that are capable of interacting with the world.
Well, I'm thinking this, and I'm thinking, okay, I hope we're not going too crazy for maybe people that are not expert in this, but I think you explain it in a way that makes a lot of sense in terms of, if you got the data, which I can translate in human as knowledge, then you can use that knowledge/experience to adapt. And that's what we do as human, right? So that learning thing is like, have I been in this situation before? Not quite exactly the same, but seems similar to me. Maybe I can, doesn't look like that wall and that window, but it's still, it probably seems to be a different kind of wall and window. Maybe I can go through it. So if we assume that we're really getting to a human way of thinking here, nobody's
Absolutely.
born with the knowledge, right? I mean, again, AI is human more than we think.
Yep. And what's fascinating is while it does seem that way on the outside, and all external indicators would indicate that, if you look at really the way these systems work, the language models really are autocomplete engines. The image generation is really just autocomplete based on the context that it has available. Essentially, the robotic stuff is exactly the same. So while it is fascinating to see that just kind of computational actions based on probability become, from the outside looking in, all of the things that you would expect from an intelligent entity. And so it really does kind of raise some questions of kind of what is consciousness in the first place? What is free will? What is, and I think that's where we're starting to see again that entanglement of emerging technology with the questions of physics and philosophy and kind of those underlying fundamental sciences that in the past were kind of two very separate things that rarely intersected.
Mm-hmm. And that's where we get very philosophical, because it's about what makes us human, and that's the big question. So I want to touch to this with a little bit of a quick reflection before we end on what is actually happening in our society with this. So we've seen writer go on strike. We've seen actor go on strike. We see a lot of fear in a lot of other jobs. I was listening to an economist from Harvard that he was like, we've gone through this before. We've gone through this with the Industrial Revolution. We've gone through this with the computer, the digital revolution. And sometimes it's going to level in the middle. Sometimes it's going to level towards the top. But we will be able as human to find new jobs, as we've always done. But in the meantime, I think what I want to go with you, in the short term, I feel like there is already more benefit than negative consequences. Finding cures, medicine, pharmaceutical, scanning, and I'm saying the health department, but I can go in a lot of different places. I mean, there are applications for resolving the climate change, which we're running out of time, and maybe we just bought ourselves time. So a view on that I would love.
I think you're absolutely right. This is, in its very nature, this is a disruptive technology. So it's not inherently bad. It's not inherently good. And I think both of those things come together. It's disruptive in the way that it is able to power new capabilities. It is able to introduce new ways of thinking and new ways of approaching problems that is unlike anything we've seen before. And we're going to see tremendous new developments come out of this. And I think you're right. A lot of that is going to be net positive for humanity and society as a whole. But of course, with any disruptive technology, you've also got kind of that double-edged sword of with that innovation also comes new risks. And just at the rate that we're moving, those risks themselves are hard to tackle while we're reaping the benefits. But I do think, I think it's interesting, the disruption in jobs topic, because I recently saw a Twitter post that kind of stuck with me, which was humans doing hard jobs on minimum wage while the robots write poetry and paint is not the future that I wanted. And I think it does highlight a very interesting turn. You compared this to the Industrial Revolution. And I think in a lot of ways, this is very similar to the Industrial Revolution. But what is different is we're used to automation and technology displacing unskilled labor. Kind of your blue collar factory work, that we've seen that for decades. And what's uniquely new about this technology is that it does stand to potentially disrupt the areas that previously were untouchable by technology, which is your creative areas or your highly skilled areas like coding and or medical diagnostics or review of legal precedent. So I think, to your point, there's right now, I think we're in a situation where people that decide to take the effort to make the effort to learn these technologies are going to benefit tremendously, but people that don't are going to get left behind. And I think the biggest change that we're seeing is we're increasingly moving away from a culture where education is foundational, where you get your education early on in life, right after you get out of high school, and then you're set for the rest of your life. And we're moving towards a world where, in order to keep up, you are going to have to engage in lifelong learning and continuing to improve and adapt your skills. Otherwise, you are going to get left behind. So I think for people that have that motivation, that drive, and enjoy continuing to learn, this is a net positive. I do think that there's others that are less interested in that and more interested in just kind of enjoying life and sitting back and relaxing, that this is going to potentially be problematic for.
I agree with you 100%, because the way I see it also, you said it's similar to the Industrial Revolution, but I see it's even more similar to the computer revolution. I mean, there have been people, and that's why there is a gap, I think, in generational gap at a certain point, maybe in the 80s, 70s, when people didn't jump on that train, is the fact that, like, yeah, I don't need a computer. I'm going to run my business like I've always done, or individually. I mean, they were just not excited, maybe like me or you or others that say, hey, it's new technology. I'm gonna try it. At least I know, right? And then slowly, maybe at that time, that if you didn't use the computer in your business, even the daily business, the store, the shop, whatever, you paid the consequences. But it took time. Now it's going to take no time. We go back to what's new this week in AI. And if you haven't at least given a try, don't say, I'm not going to ever touch ChatGPT, because it may, like you said, it may be your problem. So, yeah. Last question. You want it? Where's the plug? Can we unplug it if it goes really weird?
So what's interesting is shortly after the release of ChatGPT, there was a joke job post that was circulating around that was basically kill switch engineer. And it was over the top, kind of like, it is your job to stop the robot apocalypse and create the solution to call it quits. But I think there actually is a a valid discussion to be had there of kind of any time we're implementing these. What is the backup plan if things do go terribly wrong? So I don't want people to kind of disregard the potential for AI altogether out of fear that this is going to be the end of the world. But at the same time, I think that there does need to be some kind of consideration around whether it's an actual physical kill switch or pulling the plug from the wall, all the way up to just understanding the best ways to, because unfortunately, I mean, the truth is, and we know this from anybody that works in cybersecurity, once you talk about digital capabilities, there are already stuff like wormable malware that it moves from one system to another. Pulling the plug for where it originally started is not necessarily going to disrupt the capability in this increasingly interconnected world. So it's a fascinating discussion. I think that honestly, as much of a joke as that post was, I think that I think there's some validity to that. And interestingly enough, OpenAI actually has since kind of introduced some new capabilities around super alignment, and talking about how they're going to align super intelligence as it becomes more capable than any living human. So
maybe that is that one. Maybe there is that one thing where we all, hopefully, as the humanity, are going to agree on something. Maybe not about the way we use it, but about the way, what if it's going to go crazy on us, how we all going to stop it. And, there's always Dr. Evil, but I think for the majority, we kind of want to have a plan, I think. It's like, It's the same thing, like, if the asteroid is coming, there's no countries anymore. We're going to have to come together and have that plan, which I don't know. I don't know which one will come first, but I'm more afraid than the asteroid than the AI right now. But maybe this is the thing that pulls us together and creates global unity around solving a problem. I mean, fortunately, it didn't work with climate change, though there have been some global efforts there. But I think also there's enough politicalization. Around that politicization.
Politicization.
Well, Hutch, this was I don't know how people are feeling about it. I have fun talking about these things.
It's fascinating.
I hope people are not getting too scared. I mean, of course, we go to the extreme scenarios, and maybe we come to something that everybody can understand. But if you guys enjoyed this conversation, you're definitely going to enjoy subscribing to my channel, and definitely to Justin's channel as well, because he has some very quick stories. Well, not the last one, because you had a guest actually, so that went much longer. But when you do your own one voice podcast, you make people think. So thank you for taking the time, and come back. Maybe not every week, because that's too much to follow, but once a month, every time you want to share something with me, I'd love to have this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Marco. I really appreciate you having me on.
All right, everybody. Take care. Stay tuned for the next episode. Subscribe, and we'll see you soon.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSPmagazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.